Okay, so last two problems here, looking at number 24, still talking about grouping. Get an invoice total and count for each vendor, group by vendor name. And the results will look something like this. So we have the vendor name here. That's just the vendor name column coming from the vendors table, just a run-of-the-mill column. Then we've got two aggregate columns. One is the sum of the invoices, and then the other is the invoice count. Okay, so we're going to have three elements to our select clause. Let's take a look at the syntax here. So here we have, let me push this one down. So we're going to select the vendor name. You saw the first column, we had vendor name, and the sum, the total of the invoices, and then the count of the invoices. So this is a join because the invoice data obviously comes from the invoices table, but the vendor name itself comes from the vendors table. So we're pulling from two different tables. We've got to do a join. I'm using an implicit join here because we weren't told one way or another. And I need my where clause to join on that common column because it's just a join. And now the group by clause, we're grouping by vendor name. And, we said in the last video, if you have a run-of-the-mill column, that column has, and you're grouping, that column has got to appear in the group by clause as well as the select clause. If I wanted to add the vendor state, for example, here, the vendor state, I try to run that. Okay, it's invalid in the select list because it's a run-of-the-mill column and I'm grouping and I didn't put it in the group by list. So that's a problem. All right, so I'll get rid of that. Don't forget that. These are off the hook. Aggregates don't cause this problem. You're using an aggregate function. That doesn't create that problem. It's only when you have a run-of-the-mill column like this, it's got to appear in the group by as well. Okay, so that's that. And so we get our data as expected. Okay. And now number 25, let's take a look. This will just be a quick modification. Modify number 24 to include only those vendors that have 3 or more invoices. So where the count of the invoices is greater than or equal to 3. So we talked about this in the last video. Let me see, these two important sentences. The where clause limits the number of rows returned in a query. The having clause, and this is key here, limits the number of groups returned in the query. So when you are grouping and you want to limit the number of groups that you're looking at, you've got to use the having clause. All right, so in this case, I've modified this with I just copied and pasted number 24. It ended here originally, but I'm going to add a having clause. Having a count of greater than or equal to 3. I could, I used the asterisk here when I was counting the number of invoices. So it wouldn't have hurt anything if I had done invoice total here. It might make it a little more easy to understand in this case, but I can put that in there. Maybe that makes it a little clearer. But counting the number of invoices, basically. And I'm only interested in displaying those vendors that have 3 or more invoices. So where that count is having a count greater than or equal to 3 is where we'll see those results. So we'll go ahead and run that. Okay, you can see far fewer vendors make the cut, and all of them have a number of invoices greater than or equal to 3. So again, when you want to limit the number of groups in your results, in your grouping, you've got to do that with a having clause, not a where clause.